Welcome to SV Union High School and Junior College. Now we are going to learn the different programming techniques. There are unstructured programming, procedural programming and object oriented programming. Unstructured programming is a procedural programming in which the statements are executed in sequence as written. Assembly language is the example of unstructured programming language. It is a language, we can say that it is a low level programming language for a computer or other programming devices. After machine level language, the next level of language, that is the developers in the evolution of computer language, was assembly language. Machine level language uses any the binary language, but on the other hand assembly language was mnemonics or symbolic instruction in place of a sequence of zeros and 1. Means now when we using in a machine level language as 0 and 1, in that we were use the mnemonics or symbolic in assembly level language. Second, procedural programming language. A procedural language is a computer programming language that follows in order a set of commands. For example of computer procedural language are BASIC, C, Fortran, etc. Next, the object oriented programming language. Object oriented is a programming paradigm that relies on the concept of classes and objects. It is used to structure a software program into simple reusable pieces of code, blueprints, that is usually called as classes, which are used to create individual instances of object. Because of OOPS, that is object oriented programming, is a paradigm, there are many object oriented programming languages which includes C++, Java, Python, etc. So these are the basic concept of different programming techniques. Now we see in detail what is unstructured programming. This consists of just writing the sequence of commands or statements in the main program, which modifies the state maintained in global data. Example, assembly level language. There are some limitations of unstructured programming. First, the data is global and code operates on it. Second, as the size of code increases, maintenance is a problem. Obviously, it is very difficult to maintain if the code is large. Does not have independent data for processing. The concept of local variable did not exist because it uses the global data. Reusability of code was not supported. So these were the limitations in unstructured programming. Now we see the machine language. Sometimes it is referred as machine code or object code. Machine language is a collection of binary digits or bits that the computer reads and interprets. Machine language is capable of understanding the language of computer. The exact machine language for a program or action can be differ by operating system. It is a language which is a central processing unit of a computer, understand and consists only of numbers. It is written in the form of 0 and 1, means every command it is written by using the combination of 0 and 1. We have to write millions and thousands of 0 and 1 symbols for writing anything in machine language. Any computer can directly understand only its own machine language. It is defined by its hardware design, and this language is machine dependent, as for each and every machine it is the different combination of the symbols of 0 and 1, so that we can say that it is machine dependent language. Now we are going to see the assembly language. Sometimes it is referred as assembly or ASM. An assembly language is a low-level programming language. Programs written in assembly languages are compiled by an assembler. Using ASM, programmers can write human-readable programs that correspond almost exactly to machine language. It is called low level program language because there is one-to-one relationship between what it tells the computer to do and what the computer does. That is the interaction between computer and programmer. That is a one-to-one. Similar to machine language, it provides names for numeric instructions present in the machine language, making it easy for the programmer. It is low level language, as I said. It usually use naturally understandable symbols. It is called as a mnemonics. Example, load 5, load 1, add. Assemblers are used as interpreter. It works directly with microprocessor. So it is about the introduction of assembly language. Now we see the difference between assembly language and machine language. See, assembly language having these mnemonics, and for the machine language it is a machine code. It is a combination of 0 and 1. Assembly language is intermediate between high level language and machine code. So these are the basic difference between the assembly language and machine language. Now we see the procedure oriented programming. It is in the high level languages such as COBOL, Fortran, C, etc. is known as procedure oriented programming. Procedure oriented programming basically contains of group of instructions known as functions. There are multiple functions into the programs. Procedure oriented programming means a set of procedures, which is a set of subroutines or set of functions. So it consists of set of functions or the group of functions. Functions are called repeatedly in a program to execute tasks performed by them. For example, a program may involve collecting data from user, that is we are taking the data from the user, that is the reading, performing some kind of calculation on the collected data. So whatever the data we get, we do some procedure on that. So we can call it as a calculation, and finally displaying the result to the user when requested, that is the printing. All the three tasks of reading, calculating and printing can be written in a program with the help of three different functions which performs three different tasks. So this is the set of functions in a procedural programming language. Now we will see the example. Let's say that you are working for a vehicle parts manufacturer that needs to update its online inventory system. So it want to create an inventory system. The boss tells you to program two similar but separate forms for a website. Okay, so program we are going to create for the website but two different forms. One form that processes the information about the car, that is one form we create for the car, and second one that does the same for the trucks. So two forms we are going to create for the two vehicle, that is the car and the truck. For cars, suppose we need to record the following information: color, engine size, transmission type and number of the doors. This information we are going to create in a form for the cars, and for the trucks the information will be similar but slightly different. We need color, engine size, transmission type, cab size, towing capacity. So these two forms we are going to create for the two different vehicles. Now suppose we want to need the information for the bus form, that is the third form we are going to add, that records the following information: color, engine size, transmission type and number of passengers. Suppose we are doing this by using the procedural language, then we need to recreate the entire form repeating the code for color, engine size and the transmission type. Okay, so we need to recreate entire form. But if we are doing this by using the object oriented programming, we simply extend the vehicle class with a bus class and add the methods and functions, that is the number of passengers. So this is the difference between the procedural and object oriented. In procedural we have to recreate entire form, but in a object oriented programming we just extend the vehicle class with the bus and we can add. So this is the reusability and inheritance property. Now suppose instead of storing color in a database like we previously did, for some strange reason our client wants the color emailed to him. Okay. Now when we do this thing by using the procedural, then what we do? We change the three different forms, that is the car, truck and bus, to email the color to the client rather than storing it in the database. So instead of storing it in a database, we send the mail for three different forms. But if we doing this by using the object oriented programming, then what we can do? We change the color method in the vehicle class, and because the car, truck and bus classes all extend, that is the inherit from, to put it another way, the vehicle class, they are automatically updated because these three classes, that is car, truck and bus, are inherited from the vehicle. So whatever the change we make in a vehicle class, that are automatically comes to the these classes because of the inherit. So this is the way. Now there is a one more scenario. If we found a bug in the transmission type area of our form and need to fix it. Okay, so then what we do? If we are using the procedural language, then we open and update each form, that is whatever the forms are there, then in that we go and we make a changes. But if we are using the object oriented programming, then we fix the transmission type method in the vehicle class, and the change are there in every class that inherits from it. So we have to make change only one class, that is the vehicle class, from which other classes are derived. Now we are going to learn the difference between the procedural object oriented and the object oriented programming. First, procedural object programming. In procedural object programming, program is divided into small parts called as functions. Okay, but in object oriented programming, the program is divided into parts, it is called as objects. So this is the difference. In a procedural we can say that the part as a function, but in object oriented we called as a object. Second point, in a procedural object oriented programming, it does not have any proper way for hiding data, so it is a less secure, as we cannot hide the data, so it can be accessed by anywhere, so security is less. But in object oriented there is a characteristic of data hiding, so it provides more security than procedural. Example of procedural programming: example C language, VB language, Fortran and the Pascal. And the example of object oriented as C++, Java, VB.NET, C#.NET, etc. So this is the basic difference between the procedural object oriented and object oriented programming. Now see, in a procedural there is a top down design, but in a object oriented, object focused design. So when we are going to design the program, it is considering the object. In procedural, second point, limited code reuse. We cannot reuse the as much code as we can use in a object oriented, but in object oriented we can use the code, that is the reuse. Then in a procedural, third point, complex code is there, as we are writing the number of the functions, number of times, so it is a complication becomes. But in object oriented programming, complex design is there, programming design is the complex. Procedural, global data focused, and in object oriented, protected data, data is protected. In object oriented methodology is a certain process through which software can be developed. So by using its methodology we can create the softwares. The goal of this methodology are to achieve software systems that are reliable, reusable and extensible. Hence, it is more useful in the long run as we can use the code, we can extend and it is a reliable. The methodology achieves its goal by the help of a collection of objects that communicate by exchanging the message. So, in a program we can write or create a number of the object and that object communicate with each other by exchanging the messages. Now we'll see what is the object orientation. A technique for system modeling. Object oriented model consists of several interacting objects. We'll see in the details. What is a model? A model is an abstraction of something. Purpose is to understand the product before developing it. A model is a specific design of a product or a person who displays clothes, poses for an artist. A model is an informative representation of object, person on a system. So this is the basic thing about the model. Examples of models are highway maps, architectural models, mechanical models. So these are the live examples of the models. Little more examples of the models are person, house, tree, car, etc. Example of the model. See object, Ali, house, car and tree. These are the objects. Now see, Ali lives in a house. Ali drives the car. Nearby the house there are the different trees are there. So interaction is what? Ali lives in the house. Ali drives the car. So these objects can communicate with each other. See, advantages of object orientation. First, people think in terms of the object. So when we are going to think about the program, we consider the objects. Object oriented models map to reality. Therefore, object oriented models are easy to develop and easy to understand. There are some advantages of object oriented programming. Objects are modeled on real world entities. Okay, when we are consider the examples as a man, car, Ali, house, these are the real world entities. This enables modeling complex systems of real world into manageable software solutions. It provides data hiding, it provides data encapsulation, it provides data abstraction, it provides reusability of code, it provides easy code maintenance. So because of these advantages or characteristics, the object oriented programming become more powerful. Now we see what is an object. An object is something tangible, that is Ali, car, as we have seen in previous example. Something that can be apprehended intellectually, that is time, date. Objects are key to understanding object oriented technology. When we look around, we will find many examples of real world objects as dog, desk, television, car, etc. What is an object? An object have state, that is attributes. It is have well defined behavior, that is operations, unique identity. Object have state and behavior. Identifying the state and behavior for real world objects is a great way to begin thinking in terms of object oriented programming. So it is an object. Example, Ali is a tangible object. So what is the state? That is the attribute name and age. This is the attribute of the Ali. Then behavior, that is the operations. Ali can walk, Ali can eat. So this is the behavior or the operation can done by the object. And identity, his name. How can we differentiate these Ali from any other person? Because of his name. That is the one object can differentiate from other object by using its name. So these are the some characteristic, that is a state, behavior and the identity which have for each and every object. We see in a deep what is the OOP, that is object oriented programming in C++. The prime purpose of C++ programming was to add object orientation to the C programming language, which is in itself one of the most powerful programming language. Okay, so the main concept was what, to add the in a C, that is the object orientation. C was procedural, but because of C or C++ becomes because of the adding the object concept. The core of the pure object orientation programming is to create an object in code that has certain properties and methods. While designing C++ modules, we try to see whole world in the form of objects. For example, a car is an object which has certain properties such as color, number of doors and the like. It also has certain methods such as accelerate, brake and so on. So main purpose of C++ is what? To add the object. Now see the advantages of using OOPS, that is the object oriented programming. Object oriented programming provides a clear modular structure for programs, which makes it good for defining abstract data types where implementation details are hidden and the unit has a clearly defined interface. Okay, so modular structure is added. Object-oriented programming makes it easy to maintain and modify existing code as new objects can be created with small differences to existing ones. Okay? And object-oriented programming provides a good framework for code libraries where supplied software components can be easily adapted and modified by the programmer. So these are the some more advantages of using object oriented programming. Now we are going to learn the following concepts in object oriented programming in C++, that is the objects, classes, data abstraction, data encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, overloading, reusability. So these are the characteristics which are added in a C++ languages. So it becomes more powerful. Now we are going to overview for this concept. First, class. Here we can take human being as a class. A class is a blueprint for any functional entity which defines its properties and its functions. Like human being having body parts and performing various actions. When we define a class, you define a blueprint for an object. Okay. This doesn't actually define any data, but it does define what the class name means. That is, what an object of the class will consist of and what operations can be performed on such an object. So this is just introduction of the class. Afterwards we are going to see in detail what is a class. Class, a collection of objects of similar types. So it consists of the object of the similar type. Once a class is defined, any number of objects can be created which belong to that class. So you can create as many as object of that one class. A class is a blueprint or prototype that defines the variables and the methods common to all objects of a certain kind. So whatever the variables and methods you create, that should be common for the object that you created from that class. Class is a user defined data type. Okay, so class is what? It is a user defined data type which is used to bind the data members and member function in a single unit. So whatever the data members and the member functions are there, that should be under the one name, that is the class. Now we'll see little about the objects. Object is the basic unit of object oriented programming. Obviously, objects are identified by its unique name. So each and every object have its name. An object represents a particular instance of a class. There can be more than one instance of a class. So you can create number of the object of the same class. Each instance of a class can hold its own relevant data. An instance of a class. A class must be instantiated into an object before it can be used in the software. Okay. a software bundle of related state and behavior. More than one instance of the same class can be existent at one time. See the characteristic, that is the abstraction. Data abstraction increases the power of programming language by creating user-defined data types. Data abstraction also represents the needed information in the program without presenting the details. So we can create the user-defined data type by abstraction or because of abstraction. For example, a database system hides certain details of how data is stored and created and maintained. Similar way, C++ classes provides different methods to the outside world without giving internal details about those methods and data. Storing data and function in a single unit, that is class, mechanism that binds together code and data in manipulates, keep both safe from outside interference and misuse. Data cannot be accessible to the outside world and only those functions which are stored in the class can access it. So we can provide the security for the data. See the next characteristic, that is inheritance. It is one of the most useful aspect of object oriented programming is code reusability. As the name suggests, inheritance is the process of forming a new class from an existing class. That is, from existing class called as base class, a new class is formed called as a derived class. That is the parent class and the child class. This is very important concept of object oriented programming, since this feature helps to reduce the code size. Okay, as it is a very important and we are using many times. An instance of a class. A class must be instantiated into an object before it can be used in the software. Okay, a software bundle of related state and behavior. More than one instance of the same class can be existent at one time. Polymorphism. The ability to take more than one form is called as a polymorphism. An operation may exhibit different behavior in different instances. Okay, but operations are different. The behavior depends on the data types used in the operation. So whatever the data you are using or the data types, the behavior depends on that. Reduce complexity by allowing the same interface to be used to specify a general class of action. So this is about the polymorphism. This is about, just we have seen what is the C++ programming and the object oriented programming and the main or some characteristic from it. Thank you.